Should you buy iPhone 11 in 2024? So this phone originally launched way back in 2019, and today we're going to talk about if this phone is still worth it here. It's really old, but it's been one of the most popular iPhones I've seen. So we're going to look at this one here, 180 to 275. That's around what you'll pay for it today. So it's about 1/4 the original cost that this phone came out with. So I'm going to start with the first one, and that is the body and the build of the iPhone 11. So the iPhone 11 is definitely no iPhone 15. That is for sure. The iPhone 15 is much more sleek than this phone, but if you really think about it, it kind of carries on a similar overall design, but definitely refined it many times over with the 15. Still retains that kind of similar size factor, aluminum edges, pretty similar on the bottom. It's overall not too off from an iPhone 15. It's just more curvy, a little thicker, and more round. But I would say at this point, it just feels like heavy and not sleek anymore. It has thicker bezels, but it still has IP68, and it still feels like an absolute tank right now. You hear that? Look at that. That is a solid piece of kit right there, even though this phone has been out that long. So if you bought one of these, let me know how your durability held up. But at this point, I can't really recommend it anymore in terms of like a sleek new phone. But as a backup option, it's pretty stellar. And if maybe you broke your phone or maybe lost your iPhone, you need a cheap one in the meantime, this could be a great option for you right here, even right now. Now, from a display perspective, if you don't compare it, the bezels are not that noticeable. But when you do compare it, they're pretty darn thick. And that notch is huge right now in 2024. However, if you love an IPS LCD panel and you really don't like OLED displays, they hurt your eyes, stuff like that, even though manufacturers are starting to correct that these days with a lot of enhancements, the LCD is still some of the easiest on certain people's eyes, which is niche. Only certain people are dealing with that, but those who are and those who love an LCD display, this is kind of the only way I could recommend still using this phone now, because it has a pretty bad resolution of 1792 by 828. So you can't really see it on screen. But the 326 ppi is much lower than the 15. The 15 Pros, all those newer iPhones are just much sharper. And well, it's not that noticeable. It's still kind of like the display just looks really dated at this point. So it's really hard to recommend this unless you have a strong dislike for OLED panels. 60 hertz though means that it pretty much runs like an iPhone 15. You wouldn't actually notice too much of a difference here between this and an iPhone 15 in terms of just kind of like how it like scrolls through the panels. It doesn't look that much different. But you'll really notice a difference in brightness, resolution, OLED, the much thinner bezels. Really has changed quite a bit since then. So tough to recommend here in 2024. But at a $180 price point, it's still a pretty solid display, I would say. Okay, so the software on here, I'm actually in the midst of doing an update to 17.4 on this one. I wanted to save it though before I did that to show you that this phone is still receiving, even though it's from 2019, it's still receiving the latest and greatest updates. You're even getting all the latest updates from 17.4, but I'm a little worried about iOS 18. I'm pretty certain it'll get iOS 18, but I'm not certain if it's going to get all the rumored features that iOS 18 is going to bring. So this one is getting near its last legs. It's got maybe a couple years of updates. So if you're buying this for long-term usage, not a good decision. This one's already headed towards its 5th year. Apple usually goes 5 or 6 on the iPhone. So you can enjoy it for a year or two more if you really wanted to pick this up for a low price point, but it's not going to go much further than that. So the A13 Bionic chip in here is not the fastest anymore, clocked in at 2.66 gigahertz, 4 gigs of RAM, but it's still a decent 7nm chip, meaning that day-to-day stuff on this phone is actually very functional in 2024. And the only major difference between this and like a newer iPhone is that there's like a snappier feel. Like the apps open crazy fast, insanely fast these days. Whereas you might wait a second or two on a phone like this for things to load and stuff like that. Like it's not just going to pop right in very fast. But it could still do the job day to day, and I don't think it's anywhere near slow to a point where it's going to like slow you down functioning in day-to-day life in 2024. So it's okay. It's average now. It used to be blazing fast, but now it's kind of average comparatively to newer phones like iPhone 15. But what about storage? This is not going to be the best option for really top tier storages, but you can get up to 256 gig, which is pretty good. Just 4 gigs of RAM though. However, iOS's efficiency proves that we don't really need tons of RAM to run the iOS operating system. It's been pretty good regardless of that fact that we don't have all that RAM, and most people will stay in one app at a time. There's not a ton of multitasking abilities here in iOS, so the iPhone 11 can still run okay even with that type of RAM and storage. So what about the cameras? This is actually one of the better parts of the iPhone 11 still. Can do very good video, 4K 60, and I just feel like the only reason that this camera is not as good anymore is because new ones came out. If this was still my camera, I'd still be pretty happy. Of course, once you start pixel peeping the new cameras, you'll see much more tack sharp images and videos. But the iPhone 11, I still think is very functional in 2024. If you were to take this phone, build an Instagram channel right now or a page, start posting all your stuff or even any type of like content, most people wouldn't even ask you which camera you're using. Like, it's still that good. It definitely is. I mean, it really... These days, we're just like getting better and better with Zoom, AI stuff, you know, kind of the post-processing on the new ones, HDR stuff, things like that. But all those are just kind of enhancements on what was already pretty great with something like the iPhone 11. So I still recommend this if you're looking for a cheap, good iPhone camera. Even if you wanted to buy this as a backup B camera for some B-roll, this could be a solid option. It does 4K 60. It does 4K 60 on the front as well. It was one of the first phones to do that, and iPhones to do that, and I really loved it when I first got 4K 60 on the 11. It was fantastic. To this day, I still think these are pretty darn good cameras. So the audio performance on here is solid, but it's not going to blow you away. It's not super loud. It's not super low or tinny. It's just okay right now, so keep that in mind. Battery life is going to be very dependent on your capacity. So whichever one you buy, how much capacity you have in there, it's going to be very dependent on that. I could say, though, the newer softwares tend to drop the battery a little bit. It doesn't run as efficiently as it used to, but it's still pretty much a decent all-day phone if you monitor your usage and you don't go overboard with heavy use. But definitely get the battery replaced if it's lower than like 90 or maybe even 85. Get the battery replaced. You'll have much better battery. 3110 though, you just cannot expect a 4000 or a 3800 milliamp hour performance or even a newer, faster chip performance. This phone definitely tends to get a little bit warm though under heavier pushing it. You can kind of feel it on the sides and the back area. It just tends to get a little bit hotter than newer phones. But battery life wise, if you're not overdoing it or not over pushing it too hard, it can definitely make it a day. Should you buy this in 2024 in connectivity? Well, you have Wi-Fi 6, which is still fine. Bluetooth 5, which is also still fine. So it could connect to AirPods and Bluetooth pretty quickly and easily. Not as fast as some of the newer standards, but the real Achilles heel on this one is the lack of 5G. So if you're looking for a 5G phone, this one doesn't have it. However, 5G hasn't overly impressed me, even on these newer phones, in the sense of that they haven't really changed my everyday life too much. I don't feel like I noticed that much of a performance enhancement on 5G. I do notice that the signal strength holds on better, like it doesn't go out as much, and just look at the difference between those bezels. It is very noticeable, but the 5G hasn't been life-changing for me. It has been a speed enhancement, but not life-changing. So I think 4G is still okay. It's just something that I don't want to recommend you invest in because it's an older technology. But if this is like you're set on this phone, you're buying it for a cheap price for whatever specific reason you have, it'll work. It'll still work okay. So the Lightning era is pretty much over these days. Apple has switched to USB-C, and the remaining products will all go this way eventually. So this is on its way out. It's a pretty old technology, but a lot of people still have tons of Apple products with USB or Lightning cables. So it's not really out of style yet, but it's definitely headed that way. So you could probably get by for another couple of years. Most people are not going to give up some of those iPhones that still have Lightning just yet. So it's still okay for now. Accessories are going to switch to USB-C eventually, though. Color options are abundant for this phone, and this is the white model. It comes in black, yellow, purple, red, black, green. There's a lot of different color options, and the red one was quite nice. The green was nice. The purple was nice. I mean, they were all nice colors here for the 11. I don't think they popped as much as the 10R colors, but they were still pretty darn good. And definitely better than some of these more pastel looking iPhone 15s, if you ask me. So in conclusion, I think this one is still a solid iPhone for a cheap option, but it's not really a recommendation for the vast majority of users. It's kind of a cheap option for a very specific cases, like maybe a backup B-roll phone, a backup phone in case something happens to your phone. A phone for someone you're getting, you're on an extreme budget. Someone wants an iPhone, they want it at the cheapest price, but they want a bigger iPhone. It's a decent one for a couple of years, but it's really tough. This one's pretty much getting quite dated, or if you pass it along to somebody, it's still a good option to do that. But going out and just purchasing one of these right now is kind of a really, really tough sell at this point. I probably wouldn't do that unless you're a very specific person, because even some of the cheapest budget phones now have better specification than this and might be a better option, but you're not going to find a ton of budget iPhones that are better than this. So this is still a decent option. Thumbs up if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know your take on the iPhone 11. Do you still have one? Are you actually planning on buying one? Let's talk about it down below in the comments. I'll catch you on the next one. Nick here. Be sure to be well, and peace.